So my monologue last week caused quite a stir on social media. If you haven't seen it, it's about the ongoing debate in the conservative movement about what past generations of American conservatives have actually managed to conserve. They conserved our shared language, our shared history. What about our traditions, our national and Christian identity? Well, I pointed out that Bill Kristol, a dominant force in the conservative movement from the late 80s to the early 2000s, now believes that men can become women. He's what you'd call a trans ally. Now, Bill has lost his mind in recent years, but the question is, how did someone like Bill Kristol hold so much power on the right? But I wanted to engage with someone a little bit more serious than Bill Kristol. And so I responded to some comments recently made by Dinesh D'Souza. He's a great expositor of what he calls the Reagan generation and their accomplishments. And I thought I was fair to Dinesh, and I hope he thought I was fair to him. And Dinesh saw this monologue on X, and he replied that, quote, "A legitimate question deserves a legitimate answer. None of us in the Reagan generation had ever heard of a trans person until your generation. How are we to blame for a mental illness that your generation produced?" Now, I was somewhat taken aback by this response. Why? Because no one had ever heard of a trans person in the post-Stonewall riot era of second-wave feminism? This is the Reagan generation that we're talking about here, right? No one had ever heard of trans during the AIDS crisis? My generation produced transgenderism. Well, I guess if that were the case, the first thing I'd ask is, who raised these children? Dinesh has a daughter around my age, after all. Of course, transgenderism has been a contagion in these young people's social circles and on social media, and the scale of transgenderism, the scale of the problem, and the spread of the transgender ideology is much different now than it was then. That much is totally true. But how has this new generation of conservatives, the Trump generation, if you want to call it that, fared against transgenderism? In just 10 years, this generation of conservatives has made transgenderism so politically toxic that the most effective ad in the 2024 election cycle was the Kamala Harris is for they, them ad. Now, there's plenty of work to be done on trans issues, for sure. But bans on men and women's sports, bans on child mutilation, they've all passed the House. They're waiting in the Senate. And in past years, Republicans were too afraid of being called homophobic and transphobic to bring these issues to the floor. It's why a lot of these squishy conservatives, quote unquote, no, they're just rhinos, these squishy Republicans, they voted in favor of the Respect for Marriage Act in 2022. How did past generations fare against the most important social issue of their time? That issue was defending traditional marriage. They lost. In a span of decades, America upended an institution that has been around for thousands of years, since the very beginning. And we're really only just starting to see the ramifications of that. Now, if I were in the shoes of those in the Reagan generation, my first response would not be that transgenderism just came out of nowhere. I would blame the courts. The conservative movement did not lose this battle. The black robes just decreed it. Or maybe I'd point out that the Defense of Marriage Act was passed in 1996 and that it was replaced in 2022 with the Respect for Marriage Act and ask, who really lost this battle? But they didn't. And why didn't they? Because the conservative movement was in retreat on the issue of gay marriage long before Obergefell came down. As late as 2012, a plurality of Americans believed in upholding traditional marriage. But support for traditional marriage had been on the decline for over 2 decades. In 1993, when the Hawaii Supreme Court ruled in Bayer versus Lewin that denying marriage to same-sex couples was presumed to be discriminatory and that the impetus was actually on the state to justify those denials, at that time, polling showed over 2/3 of Americans disapproved of legalizing same-sex marriage. Barely over a fifth supported same-sex marriage. And by the early 2000s, support was around 55%. And in the years after Obergefell, the 1993 numbers had been inverted because, Will and Grace was a good show. And as for the Defense of Marriage Act, which passed with broad bipartisan support in both chambers, well, that was a compromise. It was a compromise with Democrats. In response to the 1993 ruling, some conservatives wanted to move on a constitutional amendment protecting marriage. But no, that was too bold. The Defense of Marriage Act was good, but the Defense of Marriage Act was not protected from activist judges. Now, later efforts to strengthen the Defense of Marriage Act and protect it from the courts failed, and when those efforts failed, that's when conservatives went for a constitutional amendment. This was during the Bush years. The Bush years were too late. If they had acted right after the Hawaii ruling in 1993, who knows what could be different today? We could have a constitutional amendment protecting traditional marriage. And only 4 years after Bush had endorsed an amendment to protect traditional marriage, John McCain was making the argument that marriage was an issue of states' rights. He supported the Defense of Marriage Act, but he didn't support the constitutional amendment to protect marriage. He was the GOP nominee. Thus began the era of conservatives claiming the federal government has nothing at all to do with marriage. No, the Constitution says nothing about marriage. No. What followed was a series of legislative and judicial defeats on the state level in Texas, in Florida, in Louisiana, Colorado, Missouri, Arizona. The list goes on and on and on. No surprise. We decentralized the whole thing, and the activist courts had their day. And the idea that the government has nothing to do with marriage is just obviously ridiculous. The Constitution is a civilizational document. It cannot plead ignorant to the fundamental relationship in society, and that's marriage. And the West has recognized that since antiquity. Go read Cicero. Without marriage, you don't have a civilization. And you can draw a direct line from gay marriage and the logic of gay marriage to transgenderism. The internal logic of the gay rights movement puts you directly on a collision course with transgender ideology because the gay rights movement asserted that there's really no difference between a man or a woman performing the roles of a spouse. If there's no difference, then what is there to stop a man from identifying as a woman? It's a legitimate question and something the conservative movement didn't have an answer for. The transgender movement was hurtling down the tracks. The train was picking up momentum. And there was once a time when I thought the people standing athwart history yelling stop would just yell as the train rushes by, or they'd potentially just get run over. To my shock, that hasn't happened. As I said, this generation of conservatives has made transgenderism so politically toxic that in the polling, we see every trans issue moving conservatives' way. And another interesting tidbit, some recent polling suggests that the approval for gay marriage is coming back down to the 55% level that we talked about in the mid-2000s. How can all this be after we failed to defend traditional marriage? Well, Terry Schilling is the president of the American Principles Project. He's been a driving force on combating transgenderism all over the country. And he's one of the few people who really saw transgenderism coming. And he's smart enough to have learned from the mistakes made in the fight to protect traditional marriage and apply those lessons to fighting transgenderism. He joins us this week on the Signal Sit Down, and we hope you enjoy. Thank you so much for tuning into the Signal Sit Down, but before we get to the interview, we'd love it if you'd hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you may be joining us. And please remember to give us a 5-star review because we love your feedback. Remember, it's your government, and together we'll expose how it really works and how to affect real change. Without further ado, here's the interview. Terry Schilling, welcome to the Signal Sit Down.
Thanks for having me, Bradley.
Of course, and we are doing this remotely because I was supposed to be joining you, recording this episode in Palm Beach. We'll explain exactly why you're down there later on in the show. But we're snowed in up here in Washington, D.C. You made it out. You're looking very Palm Beach. But we're doing this remotely, even though I'd like you to be in studio, because I think this topic is so important. And it's in response to my monologue last week that got a little bit of attention on social media, sparked some debate about the successes and failures of the Reagan generation and this generation of conservatives, the kind of Trump generation, if you want to call it that, and the conservative movement writ large. And one of the major sticking points is what happened in the battle against gay marriage versus what's happening now in the battle against transgenderism. You are one of the folks in Washington, D.C., who saw this issue coming a mile away. Your organization, the American Principles Project, has done a ton of work to make transgenderism politically toxic. We defeated a left-wing social cultural movement in 10 years. I don't think that's happened in my lifetime. I think we've lost every cultural battle we've fought. And so I just want to start with, how did we make trans a politically toxic issue? Where do the American people's, what does polling say? What does their sensibility say about the transgender issue right now?
Well, again, thanks for having me. I think these conversations are super important, especially the angle that you're coming at here, which is how do we win? How do we do this and replicate it on other issues? So I think first and foremost, you really have to understand and study the left. I think that's what APP has done a really good job at. How I understand progressives and the left is essentially they want to progress beyond all barriers, all institutions, all rules. They want to enter into like a new society, right? And that's why it's no borders, no walls, no USA at all. It's, getting rid of the nuclear family, getting rid of gender, being stuck as a male or a female to progressives is like absolute catastrophe. It's worse than slavery to them. I mean, I'm just helping you understand their mindset. It's totally crazy. And so I think understanding the left and knowing where they're probably going next was pivotal. And we caught this early on. When we first started getting into this, it was post-Obergefell, and we were looking at where the LGBT movement was going to go next. And one thing that popped up in my head was we kept looking at these conversion therapy bans, which totally crazy, but they've passed these bans for talk therapy for kids and adults to sit down with professionals to talk about the problems that they have regarding sexual orientation. But the other critical thing here was that all of these conversion therapy bans included gender identity, which was very weird. At the time, this is back in 2015, 2014, we noticed this. I was thinking, what the hell is gender identity? And I had to do a whole thing about that. And then you dig into the fact that California is taking away children from parents if the parents aren't affirming their kid's gender. And it just became clear that, I think a lot of people thought they were going to go with like thruples or polygamy after gay marriage. But the reality was they wanted to go for full victory. Like they wanted full victory, and polygamy and thruples and all that. Like, it's just not as big of a victory. If they can legally separate children from their parents, the state can say, like, you're not going to give your kid a sex change procedure. You're not going to give them wrong sex hormones. You're not going to delay their puberty. You're a threat to your child, or we're taking them away. Like, that's the end game, right? If the state can actually take your own children away from you for the crime of protecting them from mutilation, sterilization, then we've lost. Like, we've lost the whole battle. And so we understood that very early. And we started doing a ton of polling. And we polled everything on the transgender issue. We polled the sports. We polled showers and locker rooms and bathrooms. And the magic really came, Bradley, when we were able to convince political candidates to run on this and to actually run their own campaign ads, to talk about it on the campaign trail, to punch their opponent in the face with it. That's where the magic really happened. And then obviously you saw in 2024, President Trump used that Kamala's for they, them ad to get to victory. And it's not even a question about whether or not that ad was the difference maker. The Democrats have all said that he would not be president without that ad. It swung the most voters over to him. The most swing voters, they said their top issue was that Kamala cared more about transgender issues than people like them. It was super powerful. So you need the base of support with the American people, and you need politicians to actually fight on it. You need to get it into campaigns, elections. A lot of people think that politics is just solely downstream of culture. What they really mean is that politics is impacted by the news. It's impacted by the schools that people attend. It's impacted by pop culture and the things that people consume. But politics is a way to get arguments across. It's a way to bring up new issues. And so I think if Republicans and conservatives want to be successful in the future, we have to look at politics as part of the culture. And I think that's ultimately what APP did was we saw where this was going. We had a good idea. We knew how big of a threat it was. We got people talking about it. The other thing I'll tell you just real quick, because I know I'm going on long, people didn't believe this stuff was happening in the beginning, right? We had to work really hard to show them, but the left really helped us because they started bragging about all the championships that these guys were winning, and the sports issue and the sports angle is such a good one because it really shows in very simple terms what's at stake, like at a minimum, and how absurd the whole argument is. Like when you have a 6'5" heavyweight champion beating up women in the Olympics in boxing, probably not a good idea, right, for anyone. So it's I don't know. I think it was just the left's overreach, the left's radicalism, and then convincing politicians to make Democrats pay a political price. I think that's what really made it successful. You saw the exact opposite on gay marriage, and frankly, Bradley, I don't think we had to. I don't think if you look at the polling on gay marriage up until Obergefell, a majority of Americans still supported traditional marriage. They did not want to change it. They were fine with civil unions for the most part, but they did not want to change it. The courts delivered that victory, and it was because they saw politicians running from it, starting with John McCain in 2008 when he said this is a state's issue. It's not a matter for the federal government. Think about how absurd that is, right? Like marriage is like one of those universal things. Like we're in a 50 state compact, together. You have to be able to transfer marriages across state lines. Like gay marriage in California, how is Alabama not going to accept that? Marriage never should have been a state level issue. It should always have been a federal issue. Gender, all these issues that are universal and obvious truths, those should all be federal issues, national issues.
Okay, so really quick on this polling, because there's so much there. Like you polled all of these various issues. You pay a lot of attention to the polling. The men and women's sports is an 80-20 issue. But we have a majority of support for outright bans on mutilation of minors. We have outright support on banning men from women's locker rooms. I mean, this was not the case just 10 years ago, right? So like how much has the public opinion shifted? And then you guys did an analysis. It wasn't just like Democrats are saying, oh, we kind of went too far in on the trans stuff in 2024. You did an analysis. You actually studied this Kamala Harris for they, them ad in 2024. So give us the numbers real quick on the polling side and how it shifted over time.
Yep.
And then give us how this kind of all culminated in 2024 with this amazing ad.
Well, just to be totally clear about the polling numbers, we've actually always had a majority. The bathrooms and locker rooms, even when Pat McCrory lost in North Carolina over that issue, I don't think he actually lost over the issue, but it was at 57, 58, 59% support in the polls when people understood what the bill did. The bathroom bill, that is. What I will tell you, though, is that ever since the politicians started talking about this and passing legislation, by the way, we're up to 27 states, but that have banned sex change for kids and men and girls sports. But once the politicians started talking about it, we saw something phenomenal, which is the gap started to widen for the good guys. So the day that Trump signed his women's sports executive order into law last year in January, it was at 79-19 support, right? Just a year ago, CNN did a whole segment on this. It was a 63-30, right? Like, so the numbers are actually getting worse for Democrats. They're losing the people that were just kind of like, yeah, let's support transgender people. And now they're saying like, oh no, this is unfair. Like we can support transgender people, but like there are areas where sex actually matters. But every poll we've seen, and we did do an analysis on the Kamala's for they, them ad, and the whole transgender issue. It shifted around 5% of the electorate in 2024. Right? Like
that's enough to swing the election. Yeah.
That's enough. That's more than enough. Like in a lot of these tight races, you need 2 points. Sometimes 1 point to shift is good. But and what's interesting, Bradley, is ever since APP started running campaign ads on this, so we just do digital ads and we take out a control group before we contact the people that we're targeting. We do a poll afterwards. How did the control group vote that never saw our ads? And how did the treatment group vote that saw all of our campaign ads? We shift on average 4.9%. So these numbers all track and it's like independently verified. So like if you're a Republican and you're still not talking about this stuff, you're still not punching your Democrat opponent in the face, making them look. The beauty of the trans issue is that it's so crazy that when you point out what Democrats are signing on to, the bills and legislation that they're not just like voting for, that they're co-sponsoring and introducing, voters leave them. They don't support the trans agenda in any way whatsoever. So if you're not attacking your opponent on this, you're allowing them a free shot, right? Why would we allow them a free shot? This issue opens up the doors. It makes them think. Here's the thing. If you're a Democrat and you want boys and girls showers and locker rooms and you want sex change for kids, what are you going to be right on? Marginal tax
Yeah.
rates, corporate tax rates, like, Social Security funding levels. Like, no, if you're wrong on giving kids sex changes,
You're going to be good on rule of law when you don't even know who has standing based on, discrimination claims and stuff like that. It's so true. And what you're laying out here is a completely different type of argumentation from the gay marriage stuff. You mentioned the McCain. Well, this is a states' rights issue. No. We cannot make just little practical political arguments. We cannot make political arguments that are on the margins. We need to go to the root of the problem. And I think a lot of the success that the right has had in making trans politically toxic is we're not arguing about politics. We're arguing about nature, about what is the nature of man, what is the nature of families, how do those create flourishing societies? We are going to the root of the problem instead of getting nervous because Will and Grace was a good show and running away from the serious political issues here, right? And so I have very little patience for people who say this didn't come from anywhere. You mentioned, you started really digging into this stuff post Obergefell. You're like, maybe they're going to do polygamy. Oh, we're going to do gender identity. What the heck is gender identity? and there is a certain element of the left that gets this right here. Sex is your biology, right? It's not divorced from gender. Gender and sex aren't divorced things. But your gender is how you, as a higher ordered being created by God, interact in the world based on your sex, right? They're totally linked. But this whole reduction of like biological sex. No, I think we're actually, some conservatives sell the importance of gender and the beauty of gender, which is fully realized in marriage, short when they do that type of stuff. And so you mentioned Obergefell. There was all sorts of trans stuff going on in the gay rights movement era prior to Obergefell. You know a lot about this topic. And I've had some people like Dinesh D'Souza who responded to my monologue, and I was kind of engaging in a debate with Dinesh on that issue on social media. But my monologue was in response to Dinesh's claims of what the Reagan generation achieved. And he said, quote, "None of us in the Reagan generation had heard of a trans person until your generation. How are we to blame for a mental illness your generation produced?" I mean, the first question I have to Dinesh and people like him is like, well, who was raising those children? Like, I know Dinesh has a daughter of my age. Like, that's kind of weird.
Yeah.
But like, this was all there. The logic of gay marriage actually is there is no difference between a man and a woman performing the role as spouse. So
Yes.
if there is no difference between the man and the woman in that crucial, fundamental root role, then there's really no difference between men and women. And so why can't a man become a woman? And you've known this for years. You saw this coming a mile away. Tell us what was going on with the trans stuff during the gay rights movement and
Yeah.
how this was going to be coming.
Well, so, okay, let's go back to the 60s. During the sexual revolution, right? The sexual revolution, before we do this, go back to my definition, how I explain progressives. They want to progress beyond all barriers and institutions. They think
Right.
that it's
Total
like a trap. Totally done. They don't want laws. They don't want money. They don't want property. They don't want because they don't want churches. They don't want religion. Because these things that exist that are real, people can belong to. They can be part of a community. The whole goal of progressivism is to make everyone completely independent and not dependent on each other, which is totally against God's design. So going back to erasing all those differences and progressing beyond these barriers, feminism, the sexual liberation movement, feminism was actually not about elevating women. Women were elevated in society at the time, right? Like they already had voting rights when the new wave or the second wave feminists came around. They already had voting rights. Fine, great. But then they started pushing for abortion. They started pushing for men or for women in the draft. They started pushing for the Equal Rights Amendment, right? Like these are things that don't elevate. Women didn't have to go serve in the military. Women didn't have to get sent to the front lines because we valued them. They were venerated. They were elevated in society. And that's like, I know a lot of the left will laugh at that, but like, you need to meet my great grandmother, right? Like she was a World War II veteran. No one pushed her around. She was a strong woman, like way stronger than any PhD, never married woman today, right? Like she was a
Yeah.
boss and you wouldn't fool
She
her.
didn't need any SSRIs to get her through the day because her
Right.
job is so stressful.
She was
Yeah.
tough. They grew up during the Depression, right? They actually suffered. Like, anyway, so the thing is, like, everyone talks about, oh, well, where are the feminists defending Title IX and women's sports? Like, where are they? They're supporting transgenderism because feminism is not about elevating women. It's not about equalizing women. It is about eliminating women. It is about eliminating all differences between men and women in all private institutions, private spaces, all of that. They're crazy, right? Like this is obviously not normal. These people obviously have serious issues. Like if they had kids, they probably wouldn't be pushing this stuff because they wouldn't have time to get into it. But like for Dinesh to blame, and I love Dinesh. I've been a huge fan of his since I was a
Oh,
kid.
I do too. I think he's very respectable, but I just think that this is curious. Like, why is
Well,
this the response?
Well, it came the original thing came from Judith Butler. She was a professor from UC Berkeley, radical feminist, and she was very direct about this. I forget which book she wrote it in, but she said, with transgenderism, we're going to use gender to destroy gender. That's what they said. And that's actually why if you look at like the consequences of the Equal Rights Amendment and you compare them to what the trans movement is doing right now and what they're trying to achieve, it's the same outcome. It's the same outcome. It's men and women's private spaces, women losing their rights, losing the definition of women. Like we really have, they're going to try and make us genuflect and say that trans women are women. Like that's so crazy. Like you're obviously something different than a woman. Like not quite a man, not at all a woman. You know what I mean? Like less of a man, not quite a woman. But anyway, yeah, it actually was the '60s, the boomers, these radicals who embedded themselves and they spread all this feminist propaganda that men and women are exactly the same. That look, and it's what the devil always does. Like I keep going back to this. It all comes down to religion at the end of the day, and I hate saying that because you're not supposed to in politics, but the devil always takes a truth and then he inverts it, right? So men and women are equal. We're not the same. We're actually the exact opposite, and we complement each other. Like we literally fit together like a piece, like a puzzle piece. And it's a beautiful thing that's part of God's creation. And once you start treating us the same, it doesn't end up well. I mean, women have never been more miserable under the feminist regime. Like, they've never been in more therapy. They've never been on more SSRIs. They've never been more miserable. And it's because they're not getting married. They're not having kids. They're not going to church. They're looking for love in all the wrong places. They're looking at themselves like it's self-worship. And of course, you're going to hate yourself if you're only focused on yourself because we're all flawed. And
Right, we're all flawed, and we're not supposed to worship ourselves as God.
right.
God exists for a reason, and it's so that we don't idolize ourselves in many ways.
Yeah, especially in these ways.
When you idolize yourself, if your God is yourself, then you're in a lot of trouble. But you mentioned so that the feminists, right? Of course, this is actually like going even back to the first wave feminists. I know there's debate about that right now on the right. Where's the line with feminism? Was it the second wave feminists and first wave feminism was okay? Well, first wave feminism actually falls into the over universalization. They lose all sense of the particular, and that particular being your gender as a higher ordered being in community, in communion with another person, in communion with God, right? There's an over universalization that happens. Kirk says it. I love Russell Kirk. He says, beware of the sophisters, and those sophisters are the feminists. Beware of the calculators. So I have a heavy distrust of anything that comes out of any econ think tank in this Washington, D.C. town. But it also applies to science, right? Like the conservative movement, at least the traditionalist conservatives in the conservative movement, have always been very skeptical of science. It's all very Jurassic Park if you've watched that movie, right? They were too preoccupied if whether they could that they stopped. They didn't think if whether they should,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And we saw that on display in the 60s as this wave of feminism pushing into transgenderism was happening. And you've mentioned this guy to me, and I want you to tell the audience about John Money.
Yeah, so John Money is a super dark man. He was a psychiatrist, and the famous case around him is an absolute catastrophe. And the New York Times covered it up. All of the major medical associations covered it up. Essentially, John Money started seeing these two twins. I know they're the Reimer twins. One of them's named David. David's the tragic one, but they both ended in tragedy. Essentially, when they were born, one of the kids had their genitalia disfigured through circumcision. And so basically, they brought John Money in, who was a blank slate, progressive type, who basically had already been coming up with this theory of like, well, just go the full way and turn it into a neo vagina. Gosh, I have to say these words that are so uncomfortable. Um, let's turn it into a neo vagina. Gender is just a social construct. We'll raise him as a girl. He'll never know. Years go by, man, and he's playing with trucks. He's not like the genitalia had nothing to do with it. It's in every level of your DNA. It's in every tissue. It's in every aspect of you is XX or XY. And long story short, he promoted it. John Money, the doctor that was involved, promoted it as a great success, proving that gender is just a social construct. But then they never tell apart about how David Reimer committed suicide. And how his life was absolutely devastated when he found out that his parents gave him a sex change and dressed him up as a girl. He went back to being a guy. His brother ended up committing suicide as well after David had passed. The whole thing's a tragedy. And John Money and the whole transgender movement, where they're making $4.5 billion a year, I think that number is going to be revised because of everything that the Trump admin's done to curb it. But they've made so much money off of this lie. And it's like, it's not just a white lie. It's a lie that literally led to two suicides. And
this is dark. These people were turned into guinea pigs for progressive social ideologies and applied to science.
yeah, and what the left would say, or what the trans industry advocates would say is, well, this was still forced upon this kid. He didn't identify that he didn't have gender dysphoria. It's all, I mean, they're just liars. I mean, you're sterilizing and mutilating kids. Forgive me for not believing anything you say ever. Like stay away from my
Yeah.
school.
So it really makes you wonder, though, if this is all happening in the background and like, these people who are pleading ignorance on Twitter, like, how did the conservative movement not stop something that they didn't see coming? Like, all this is happening in the background, and we end up losing the decades-long battle against gay marriage. You mentioned the courts. Of course, the courts had a major role in this. Of course, I'm happy that the Defense of Marriage Act passed during the Clinton administration. Like, that, I think, is a very strong thing. But this cycle, this whirlpool of culture and politics, we were losing the argument in the culture, and we were starting to lose that in politics at the same time. And so there's like this reduction or this retreat that happens in the conservative movement on the gay rights issue, on the gay marriage issue. I mean, how how did we lose the gay marriage battle in particular? And what did you learn from that loss that you have since applied to your battle against transgenderism?
Well, what we learned is that the states' rights fights, so when you work in the states to pass laws around whatever issue you're doing, they're good for building momentum. They're good for proving an example of how these laws can work in politics. So you pass a law in Florida, like Florida and Texas were our top two states. The left was essentially doing economic boycotts of any state that passed any law that was anti-trans in any way whatsoever. And they would bully states like South Dakota, North Carolina. That was the whole bathroom bill. They were all these corporations like PayPal and eBay and the NCAA March Madness. Like they all pulled their stuff from the state, and the news headlines were HB2 cost the state $13.5 billion. So we targeted smaller states to pass our sports laws in. Then we were really prioritizing Texas and Florida because Disney's not going to leave Florida, right? They're going to stay in Orlando. So if we could get a victory there,
Too much ground infrastructure there.
so the state battles where it's different with marriage is the marriage movement retreated to the states. It's the exact opposite of what you should be doing. You should be passing a national law. Anything you want to lock in as a victory, you need to go to the federal level and pass it. And they went literally the exact opposite. They started with DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act, with Bill Clinton in the '90s, which was we were about to pass a traditional marriage amendment, and Bill Clinton gave DOMA as like I'll sign this. It was a kicking the can down the road for the left, and it went the exact opposite way. It went from federal priorities all the way back to the states, and that's how we lost. And the trans movement's going the exact opposite way, right? So we're passing these laws in the states to show politicians this is a winner. It makes sense. It works. And now we got to get a national law passed. If we fail to get a national law passed, what's going to happen is California, Illinois, New York, all these blue states, they're going to keep mailing in wrong sex hormones into the red states that have banned this. They're going to mail in puberty blockers like Lupron into the red states that have banned this. They'll recruit people and bring them across or state lines to get the sex change procedures in California. And what will happen is the industry will keep growing because California is going to subsidize it with tax dollars. New York's going to subsidize it with tax dollars, and the industry will get bigger. And what do they do with a bigger industry with more money? They reinvest it into expansion, right? You buy a new clinic, you make more money. And next thing you know, now you got lobbyists in Alabama that are arguing that actually kids are in danger when they don't get sex change procedures. Their life is at risk. And so the whole thing will eventually collapse if we don't get a national law passed. So that's the big lesson I've learned is states are good for building momentum, but you've got to finish the job. You've got to get a national law passed. If you don't do that, it's only a matter of time before, because the left is so serious about like just destroying. They have an easier job than we have, by the way, Bradley. Like they're not actually building institutions. What they're doing, any institutions like the trans industry that they have built, it's just destructive, right? It's literally just eating up people and chewing them up and spitting them out and taking their money. It eventually will consume itself in the long run. But they are so dead set on final victory, and Republicans and conservatives need to have that same mindset. This is not the Clinton years, right? Like we can't just disagree and then all get along. Like we disagree on fundamental issues, not what the marginal tax rate should be, not what the corporate tax rate should be. We disagree on what a man is, on what a woman is, on whether or not parents are a threat to their children for not letting them get a sex change. I won't let my kids eat too many Skittles or drink too much Mountain Dew, but like these parents by the left, they're the only ones protected, the ones that are giving them wrong sex hormones and puberty blockers. So we have to win. We have to get a national law, and that's the big lesson I learned.
Yeah, we have to win, and we have to do this on the national level. We have to attack these things at the root, because you're totally right. If it doesn't change on the national level, then it becomes an industry, right? There's the feminism industry. There's the homelessness industry now. One of the major barriers to doing anything to clean up the streets in California is a massive homelessness industrial complex that basically gets a whole bunch of money from the federal government, from the state government, from all sorts of donors to help the homeless. And then they also intervene in the courts, and they say, actually, even though we're helping the homeless, nod, nod, wink, wink, you can't remove them from the street and put them in an institution because of their mental disability. They need to actually remain on the street and remain on the the family townhouses stoop. It's just an untenable situation. And so you need to attack these things at the root, which is what the transgender industry is. And
well,
so,
and if I could add one more thing
really quickly for you, Terry, and please respond to what I just said. But as we look at this, what's the work that's left to be done? What are the main priorities as we head into this midterm election year for this Republican majority, for conservatives working in Washington and all around the country to get done before it's too late?
Well, again, I'll go back to this. I think it's all federal at this point. The states are good for temporary victories that can help build momentum, but we need to get federal victories. And like the trans movement would not exist the way it did and the way it does today without enormous federal subsidies and mandates, right? Obama, when he was president, right before he left office, he declared that gender identity was a protected class under civil rights law, under sex, that it was a sex category. So what did that do? That meant that if you're an insurance company that pays for mastectomies for cancer victims, well, now you got to cover one for a girl that thinks she's a boy, right? Like that's the weight of this, and it's subsidized, it's paid for. All these grants go to these pro-trans organizations. Look, I think what we have to do if we're going to be successful is one, pass a national women's sports law, ban all sex change procedures and surgeries for minors, and give liability protections for the adults. Allow them to sue when they come to the conclusion that they're not actually a woman, that they're not actually a man. And then we got to protect private spaces, right? Like if you're a state or a school or a university that's allowing men to go into women's locker rooms and showers, you're endangering them. You're literally violating civil rights law currently, right? I think actually a lot of the stuff you could just enforce civil rights law and be done away with it. But that's just not how these guys think and operate. The left will reinterpret things and come up with gay marriage from a Civil War amendment. You know what I mean? Like they literally interpreted gay marriage from an 1863, 1864 constitutional amendment. Like that's crazy. We need to start thinking like that because we're right, right? Like men, the whole point of Title IX was to say men can't compete in girls' sports. And that doesn't change just because that man says he's now a woman. And it doesn't matter if he's chopped himself up, if he's drugged himself up, it's all the same. You're still a man. So I think we got to get those national laws passed. But Bradley, that's just stopping the bleeding, right? Like you're literally just stopping our enemies from destroying us. We have to get rid of the two income trap. We have to get rid of all marriage penalties. We have to give hope to this next generation to where they get married and have kids again. 40% of Gen Zers say that they'll never get married. 43% say that they'll probably never have children. That is insane. That is like such a warning, red flag, siren. I don't know what's bigger than that. When 40% of your youngest generation says that they don't want to get married, what went wrong? Well, you got divorce culture, you got transgenderism, you got all this LGBT propaganda, sexual liberation, you got unlimited access to porn online. Like we're going through a lot of things that humanity has never seen. And maybe we've seen bits of it, but not at this scale with the internet and television and all the mediums that it can reach you. But we've never seen it all at once. Like it's totally crazy time. But we got to, I think the next big thing, like if conservatives really want long lasting, long standing victories, we've got to figure out how to increase marriages, how to increase the birth rate, because the polling is very clear. And once you look at family structures and how they impact voting behavior and ideology, it becomes so much more clear why the Democrats and why the left has pushed all these anti-family, child innocence laws. It's because the kids that don't get married, the kids that are raised in cohabitating households or by never married mothers, they're Democrats. And not just like normal Democrats that just like Social Security and Medicare and they go hunting on the weekend. They are freak shows. They turn into AOCs and Ilhan Omars, all the radicals that want to give kids sex change procedures. That's what that creates. But the married men vote for Republicans 60%. Married women vote for Republicans 54%. Unmarried men vote for Republicans 48%. Never married women, single women, they vote for Democrats by nearly 70% every election. That's what, if we can crack that and turn up the base with married people, their children, and like young men, I think the Republicans will win every election from here to Kingdom Come.
Okay, so you have a new project that's talking exactly about this issue and trying to celebrate the good things that come with family, that come with marriage. It's Fathers Wanted, I believe, is the title of this documentary. This is why I was supposed to be with you in Palm Beach this week. Tell us, before we send you off, a little bit about this project, and we'll let you go.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Bradley. Look, this has been a passion project of mine for a long time. It's called Fathers Wanted. It's a documentary. I go all across the country and I interview who I value as experts in our society on these issues. Lyman Stone is in it as the demographer. He has some amazing policy suggestions on marriage and family. He spent a lot of time in East Asia and saw the population collapse in real time and the effects. We interviewed Bishop Robert Barron, who with the Word on Fire Ministries. He's fantastic. Tucker Carlson's in it. He has some amazing quotes, like really deep quotes that get to the heart of what the society is going through. And we interviewed Harrison Fields from the White House. But the central premise is simple. Fatherhood impacts us as individuals. It makes men stronger when we do it right, when we take it seriously. It makes us better people. But fatherhood also impacts society. And I think we're kind of starting to lose that. Like we don't really always remember like all the problems we're going through today, it's because we don't have families like we used to, right? Like the rates of depression, the drug use, the rampant porn use, the sleeping around, like this is all because we don't have family. People have never been more miserable, never been on more SSRIs, never been on more medication, never been on more therapy. And it's because we don't have families that are strong enough to support us. And so we tell a story actually of my father, former Congressman Bobby Schilling. He passed away in 2021, but he struggled with a crack addiction. Like, growing up, we all knew it. We had to bring him to his Narcotics Anonymous meetings. But we tell that story about how my mom was pregnant with their fourth baby, my brother Joe, who's also in the documentary, and how he got clean when she got pregnant with her four because she threatened to file for divorce. And it was like returning to fatherhood saved him. And if America is going to be saved, if young men today are going to be saved, we need to return to fatherhood. So it's a call to arms, especially for young men. Like, grow the hell up, get off of DraftKings, get off of OnlyFans, stop smoking weed. Like, grow up, like, be a man, sacrifice a little, care about other people, stop self-indulging. If we return to fatherhood, if young men everywhere return to fatherhood, not only are we going to save America, we're going to save humanity. Like, we're going to save our families. You're going to save your own life. You're going to save your soul. If you're a father and you take it seriously, that's the best and easiest way to save yourself, your family, and your country. And also have a great time. Like, kids are a pain in the ass. I get it. Like, I have, our eighth on the way, but they're the coolest thing ever too. Like, it's so joyful raising them. Like, they make messes, but you teach them things. You teach them how to clean up when they make the mess, right? Like, it's all silver lining. It's all like little blessings. If you have the right attitude about being a father and having a family, you're going to have a really great time. And that's why my wife and I have 8 kids, or the 8th on the way. So, but yeah, that's what it's about. And I'm very excited. It's going to be on the Tucker Carlson Network, streaming. They have a 90-day exclusive. And then I'm looking forward to getting all around the country. We're going to do meet and greets and show this at people's houses just to help get the word out and grow support for APP. We're big family, big pharma, big oil. APP is big family. And we stopped the bleeding, I think, for the most part with trans and all the DEI stuff. But now we need to start the breathing. We need to start regrowing our country and making it stronger. And I think if we can fix the marriage problem, we can really turn things around.
Terry Schilling, congrats on the 8th. The documentary is Fathers Wanted. Make sure to check it out. Thanks for coming on the show, Terry.
Thanks, Bradley.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Signal Sit Down. Before you go, be sure to hit like and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you may be joining us. And please remember to give us a 5-star review. We not only love your feedback, but it really does help the show. Remember, it's your government, and together we'll expose how it really works. See you next time.